think, a crisis of faith between intellect and emotion.
Between intellect and emotion. So I think my emotions overwhelm me, so my intellect's not working. And the reason for that is I've known Imam Nihal for well over 10 years. Took my first Maghrib class with him many years ago right here in New Jersey. Imam Nihal is actually local to the area. His parents are from Bridgewater, so it's almost like a homecoming for him here. So very happy to have him. And I've been hoping to have him come and join us here at Bridgewater for a program. So alhamdulillah. A little background on Imam Nihal in case those who do not know and those that are online learn about him as well. Imam Nihal, he went to Montclair State University and received his undergrad in psychology. He then moved on to the Hartford Seminary over in Connecticut and received his master's in religious studies while also studying at the Harvard Divinity School. He then took a trip all the way over to India, spent numerous years, and completed his Bayyinah Dream from the Medlatul Ulama in Lucknow. Then he moved on to establishing an institute where he's the founder of a Qur'ān for professionals institute where he helps people that are professionals as they can see to get a connection with Qur'an and to memorize it. He's been doing that for years. He's also an instructor at the Fawakih Institute, and currently he's a PhD student at the Haldun University in Istanbul, Turkey. So mashallah, he has a great academic background. He's a wonderful brother. We're going to hear from him today. So I'll hand over to Imam Nihal. The format's going to be that he's going to speak for about 15-20 minutes, and then it's going to be more Q&A. So the point of tonight is for discussions. I have a link up. If you're shy, you can just do tinyurl.com/falaqa. I'm going to post it on the YouTube and the Facebook in a couple seconds as well. So tinyurl.com/falaqa. And if you're not shy, you can just raise your hand. But the goal tonight is really to have a good discussion, which is why it's not a 45-minute lecture. It's just about 20 minutes and then straight into discussion. So I'll hand over to Imam Nihal.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. First and foremost, thank you for having me. As Nadeem said, it kind of is a homecoming. So I was born in Bedminster, so like right next door. And you all probably know Bedminster because of the fact that I don't think anybody ever takes 78 for any reason if you live where we live in North Jersey. So when you come down this way, they're like, why would we get on 287 and then get on this highway to go to that part of New Jersey? So my family lived in Bridgewater many years ago in like the 80s and 90s, but I grew up in northern New Jersey in the Teaneck community. But that said, actually, we've known each other for 17 years, actually. I was just thinking about it.
Whoa.
Yeah. So it's been a while. So Nadeem, alhamdulillah, converted to New Jersey from New York some years before. He made the right decision, so we're happy to have him, alhamdulillah, and we accept him. So, but the topic that I wanted to speak to you all about is less of a lecture, and I'll tell you why. Sorry, can everyone hear me okay? Okay. So, some years ago, I was an imam in Connecticut for several years at the Islamic Center of Connecticut in the Hartford community. And I wanted to try something different where people do lectures all the time. And post-COVID or post-lockdown, I don't want to say post-COVID, but post-lockdown, I realized that the masjid has to be giving the community something that they can't get elsewhere. So if you want to go to a lecture, you can go to YouTube and go watch a lecture, right? You're not getting anything distinct in this space if both of them are the same. So the idea came up that instead of just having a lecture, why don't we have a community discussion, and how do you engage with the community, right? You talk to them, you ask questions, you ask tough questions. And so the format for tonight is going to be roughly me speaking about 4 or 5 points, and then Nadeem and me having a conversation, and then we'll welcome all of you to join in. It's kind of like a family gathering. You know when you go to a dawah or a gathering, everyone's sitting, hands closed, right? How's the weather? How are the politics of this country that we don't live in anymore? You know, how's this new car? And then finally, you pick up on a topic and everyone else engages in. So it's very similar. The idea is to have a homey feel, and I think it is a very homey feel. And I hope to, inshallah, take advantage of that. So there's a couple of things that I want to mention. The lecture tonight is called Why Islam is True. right? That's the main point. And this idea, this lecture actually stems from a curriculum that my teacher made. His name is Sheikh Hamza Karamali, and he's actually based in Istanbul, going over the fact and responding to the issue of people leaving Islam. Raise your hand if you know of somebody that's no longer Muslim, that was Muslim, that was born a Muslim. Raise your hand. Nobody on the men's side? There you go, right? And you don't just see that from one generation or the other. It's not just young people or just older people. It's an issue that's pervasive amongst the general community overall. And there's two reasons for it. Number one, often it's an emotional reason, or number two, it's an intellectual reason. It has to do with your mind. And what we'll do momentarily is examine and talk about some of those reasons, but I want to take a step back and talk to you all about a Pew study from 2018 that mentioned that for every 4 people in the United States that are Muslim, 1 of those 4 people leave Islam. That's from a 2018 study. What's the reason for that? Well, number one, they say that people are dissatisfied with organized religion, but that's actually a very broad idea. More so if you were to try and understand that topic, that if somebody is dissatisfied with organized religion, more so it may have to do with how that religion is presented, represented, and taught. The second reason that the Pew study went over as to why people left Islam was because of the fact that it didn't make sense to them. They didn't understand the faith. That's one of the reasons that people brought it up. They found there to be rational contradictions within the faith, and specifically within Islam. So, for one aspect of it, the emotional aspect as I mentioned, it could be that somebody chooses to go away from their faith, from Islam, because maybe they had a terrible experience in the masjid, right? We've heard that one. I don't want to come to the masjid because of X, Y, and Z. I don't want to do this because X, Y, and Z happened. I don't want to pray because my teacher, my Molvi Saab hit me, right? Now, emotional reasons, are they valid? Sure. Does somebody need affirmation? Yes. Do they need to heal? Absolutely. But if somebody had a bad experience with an individual that claims to represent Islam, does that mean Islam is incorrect? Realistic, does it mean that? It doesn't, right? If I had a bad experience with an accountant who stole my money, who stole my tax refund, does that mean all accountants are terrible? Right? No, nobody's going to say that. But yet for the Muslim community, often people will say, I had a bad experience, the masjid's terrible, all Muslims are bad, ha ha ha, I got 1,000 followers. Right? That becomes a recurring theme, right? Where we're just going to scold, we're going to put down, but we're not actually going to build. So between intellect and between emotion is what we see. This leads into my second point. How do we construct belief in the Muslim community? Often we hear this phrase, working hard versus working smart. Has anybody ever heard that? Right? We always tell people, don't work hard, work smart. Similarly, don't believe hard, believe smart. What does that mean? Often when young people are growing up, right? And I've heard this as well, as a young person in the Muslim community. Somebody questions their faith and they ask, how do I know if Islam is true? How do I know if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or God exists? How do I come to the conclusion that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was truthful? How do I know the Qur'an is true? We tell that person, stop questioning your faith. How dare you say something? How dare you utter that? But that's actually not what the Islamic tradition teaches, and I'll prove that to you by the example from the Qur'an. In Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah says, speaking about the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ, and recall when Ibrahim said to his Lord, كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى, how do you bring the dead back to life? Right? How do you bring the dead back to life? Okay, let's ask a question. Is Ibrahim alayhi salam asking Allah a question about something that he does? Is he? He is. Allah, how do you bring the dead back to life? Allah's response, أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ, is a follow-up question. Do you not believe? Do you not believe? And Ibrahim responds, Bala, of course I believe, walakin, but because I'm asking this question for the reason or the wisdom of understanding, لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي, to give my heart ease. That's why he's asking. So imagine this, a young man or a young woman is asking this question. A young man, a young Fatima, a young Zayd, a young Aisha, a young Yusuf begins to question their faith. And they're in a place, for example, right? They're being told, hey, go study the social sciences, become a physician, become a lawyer. Well, if you want somebody to go through that, they're going to study what? Science. They're going to study biology. They're going to study logic. And all these subjects have assumptions underneath them. All these subjects are being taught to us based on the material world around us. We learn about mass. We learn about density. We learn about these things that are proven realities. We learn about cause and effect relationships. So the teachers in these institutions are encouraging students to learn, to question, to scrutinize. But then on the other hand, right, our masajid, our communities don't foster the same sense of inquiry into the Islamic tradition. We don't say, yeah, go and question. We don't say, yeah, go and investigate. Rather, believe and believe hard. The Qur'an is true because the Qur'an said it's true. Does that actually make sense for someone to say that? If I don't believe in Islam, I don't believe in Allah, and I said, the Qur'an is true because Allah said it's true, and Allah is true because the Qur'an said it's true. That's what you would call a circular argument. That doesn't make any sense. Right? That doesn't make any sense. One of the other things I said, right? I'm not going to believe in something because the person saying it is somebody I don't like. So I'll attack the personality. Again, another form of a logical fallacy, an ad hominem attack. Right? You're attacking the person because of your own biases toward them and not allowing your mind to open up to the fact that the facts that this person is saying could be correct. Right? Even the famous hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam is what? That Allah can aid this deen even through a sinner, through a fasiq. Right? So even if the person telling us something we may not like or we may disagree with, very much so it could be that their words are true. So we have that issue that comes up as well. Right? Believing hard versus believing smart. We don't teach people to reason to faith. Instead, we tell them that you just believe because that's how we've done it. When in fact the Qur'an says what? وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ, when it's said to them, اتَّبِعُوا مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهِ, follow that which we've told you, right? Surah number 2, verse number 142. بَلْ نَتَّبِعُ مَا وَجَدْنَا عَلَيْهِ آبَاءَنَا. The messenger is telling them to believe in something that they're not familiar with. But then after they're being told what? بَلْ نَتَّبِعُ مَا وَجَدْنَا عَلَيْهِ آبَاءَنَا. No, we're going to follow what our ancestors, our forefathers did. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with following your family. There's nothing wrong with following and believing in that which you were raised with. That's actually very good. But there's a caveat. Allah says what? أَوَلَوْ كَانَ آبَاؤُهُمْ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ. But in the case where their forefathers did not rationally comprehend their beliefs, لَا يَعْقِلُونَ شَيْئًا, they didn't understand anything. وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ. And that intellect or their inability to understand rational proofs did not lead them to guidance. Why would you follow that? That doesn't make any sense. So contrary to popular belief, the Qur'an consistently calls us to rationally examine whether the things that we hold on to, our beliefs, actually make sense. It's a constant. It's a constant occurrence. So that's another thing, right? Somebody had asked me a question this yesterday. They're like, how do we go about growing community, right? Growing community. We do that by starting and planting the seeds now. If you want an idea, right? You all know this, right? You're in New Jersey. This is a brand new masjid. I'm sure there's a lot of ideas you're bringing into this space that you know what not to do because other communities did it wrong. Right? One of the intentions of a new space is to have new thinking, new ideas, better ways to approach, better ways to believe. That's the idea of it. But if we're going to make the same mistakes because what? أَوَلَوْ كَانَ آبَاؤُهُمْ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ, then we're simply reinventing the wheel and not actually helping people get to a better place. The other point that I wanted to mention is the reason a lot of times people may move away from Islam, right? Maybe because of the community. And what communities often don't do is plan. Pedagogy, right? The study of education. How do you teach people? One question that we had gotten yesterday was like, oh, the whole youth thing, like, oh, we need bring more youth into the masjid, this and that. And I kind of disagree with that to a degree, because the masjid is not just a place for youth. In a masjid, you have young children that have to be catered to. You have maybe adolescents that have to be catered to. You have college-age people that have to be catered to. You have young professionals that have to be catered to. You have older middle-aged people that have to be catered to. And you have, yes, older people in their 60s and 70s that have to be catered to. Right? There's a lot to do. There's a lot to do. And I think a lot of communities make the mistake of hiring like 1 or 2 people and expect that to cater to the hundreds of people that may live in that community. Like, you don't ever have Accenture or a consulting company bring somebody on, give a project manager and put 100 people under him. You don't have that happen. But yet in our Muslim community, we not only do that, but we expect the results of like Bain and McKinsey. Right? You expect high-level results with minimal effort, minimal planning, minimal everything. But if we actually had planned communities, we said to ourselves that just as we teach our kids what's halal and what's haram, we taught them how do you believe in a society that is not commonly Muslim, that is commonly attacking the idea of a creator or the presence of a God, that's attacking the idea of organized religion. Imagine the fruits of that 30 years from now, 20 years from now. Imagine if those things were planned. Imagine if we planned the educational upbringing of the community from this point, so that we can raise young Muslims into older Muslims, into young adult Muslims, men Muslims, women Muslims, who are able to rationalize the fact that their faith is true. They believe in their heart with full certainty what is correct. Imagine if that happened, what the positive repercussions of that would be. Right? But I think what we're currently looking at is a crisis of faith. Why? Because when somebody says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah, everyone goes, Takbir, Allahu Akbar, MashaAllah. Brother, we're your family. Sister, we're your family. If you need anything, let us know. Right? And either we disappear, and that person is having a lonely Eid, or things don't make sense to them. There's no one to cater to them, no one to teach them, which leads them to slowly drift away. Or let's say that person sticks around, but guess what? Our ability to maintain goes away. Our ability that the amount of people that are walking through the door, we have the same amount of people walking out the door. Yes, Islam is the fastest growing religion in the United States. But when we say that, we also have to realize we're pouring water into a cup with a hole in it. Right? So you can keep pouring water, but if people are walking out of the back door, then what are we actually doing as a community? And what's the reasons for that? Why are people walking out? Well, like I said, it's either something emotional or it's something intellectual. If somebody walks out for an emotional reason, say, hey, like, I had a bad experience with Islam, I kind of just want to live my life the way it is, right? Or maybe it's a young person and their parents are really strict with them and they just want to have a good time, go party and enjoy themselves. There's more leeway with working with that person to come back, because you can use emotion and appeal to emotion to work with that person. But using our minds is a skill that we have to learn. And the idea of this lecture is that it's not something that I'm just making up, but we have within Islam a 1,000-year-old tradition of using logic to conclude that God is true. Right? And it begins with, for example, looking at the creation around you. This masjid is here, right? I'm just curious, what was here before you guys built this building? Nothing? It was just land, right? So you have this land, right? And a year later or 2 years later, this masjid appears. And you say, wow, this masjid is beautiful. It's just always been here. You would say that that's a pretty ridiculous idea. You'd say that, okay, well, if this masjid was built, this masjid being built is an effect of a cause. And that cause was what? People getting together and building it. Similarly, Imam Ghazali and other scholars of theology would say what? That if something is creation, all of creation has a creator, right? So you'd begin there, and then you'd keep reasoning. All of creation has a creator, right? The universe is creation. Therefore, the universe has a creator. Very simple idea, right? I just reasoned to it. Within the Islamic theological schools, what they would do is you take these premises up until the point where you test them. Do they logically make sense? And then from there you establish what? Okay, God exists. Next point, what type of God should this be? Okay, what are the traits of that God? We haven't even said it's Allah yet. Until you get to the point and you say that, well, the beliefs that we know about, the Prophet ﷺ, he came, you can logically reason all to it. But we don't have that tradition alive within the United States, right? And if you do, it's really convoluted. Somebody's talking about it in like a classroom in academia, but it's not something brought to life within the community. Why is that? Because we are raised on an Islam that appeals to emotion solely. And think about your khutbahs, right? Brothers and sisters, donate or else. If you don't, this will happen. If you don't do this, your kids will leave Islam. It sounds interesting. Maybe there's an element of truth to it. But is that the way we want to raise a community? Right? Constantly on an emotional high. No, it's not actually. Right? You don't want to live in a high. You want to live in a stable manner in which we can actually grow ourselves. Right? And finally, it's about understanding a couple of things. Number one, are we teaching Islam as a matter of fact? Fact is what? Facts are things that you can prove. They're true, they're not subjective, they're objective truths. Is Islam an objective truth that we can reason to and prove? It is. Are we teaching Islam in that same manner? Not necessarily. Should we? Yes. And number two, if Islam is a fact, then it's not just a cultural preference. A cultural preference is what? You say, yeah, I choose to hang on to this because my family is a part of this. I don't know if it's true or not, but it seems pretty cool. And I think a lot of Muslims are kind of on that, in that space of like Muslim representation and whatnot. Now, don't get me wrong. Is it important to have Muslims seen and to be identifiable in the greater world that we live in media and all that stuff? Yes, it is. But is that the only thing that we should be aiming for? Right? Do we want to be represented by Islam within specifically by not anything of our beliefs, but just a cultural identity? No, we don't want that. That's not something that we engage with as a Muslim community. Right? We want to be known by our beliefs. Right? And so many people get gung-ho about it. Just look in like the state of India, right? You have all these like actors and actresses that are identifiable by name and that are Muslim by name. I'm not going to judge anybody, but are they doing anything while Muslims are being slaughtered in India? No, they're not. Right? Why? Because those beliefs don't affect us. Those beliefs don't affect us. So the question is, are we working with people, number one, to create an intellectual framework and reason to that? And then number two, are we creating that emotional awareness and attachment based on sound reasoning? Right? I think those are a few of the things that we can talk about, inshallah, tonight, and we can go from there. Balls in your court.
Reactions. All right, so I'll give a quick initial reaction, which is something that Brother started with at the beginning about the community and understanding we have kind of micro efforts that are needed. It's not just putting one person in place that he's going to drive the iman of the entire community. So in terms of this, have you seen, I think one thing I like to do as a business person is any working models where you've seen this successful, maybe not today, but historically, where we have context for this in our vast history of how do we take this kind of focused approach across different demographics and cohorts of people.
So are you specifically talking about the masjids or like what in particular?
Masjid or just the spreading of knowledge in general. How would we observe this in,
Yeah.
in the golden era, let's say?
So there's a couple of institutions I see that are doing great work. One of them actually is in the Atlanta area called RCM, the Roswell Community Masjid. I'm a big believer in the fact that the imam or the religious leader can do very little if the community doesn't have some direction or focus already. Like, what is it that that community wants to do? And every community is different. They have an executive director. They have an imam that just leads certain prayers. Like, they're not focused on that. They're focused on more so on community education, community initiatives. And I think you guys have a lot of stuff going on. You have like a mommy's reading group for kids. You all have, I think, you know, Sheikh Yasser coming and doing some things. I think what matters is looking at what the community needs, agreeing on that, working with a leader that can provide those services and doing that. I think the incorrect model, which I've seen in many places, is we need somebody really, really famous who can bring people here and fill the masjid for Jummah, right? And the moment the masjid starts filling on Jummah, for 1 hour, everyone's like, we need to expand the masjid, but there's nothing going on. So we'll raise millions of dollars for extra square, for a few hundred or thousand extra square feet, but there isn't actually a goal that the community is aiming for. I think that's one. I think in the secondary, and a secondary issue that comes up is like, the community has to recognize what is the intellectual framework they want to have in the community. Meaning what? Like, what is it that we want to teach old and young? How are we going to grow in this space? I think they have to define that. Certain masjids, like, they just want to maintain, right? They're maintenance masjids, right? Maintenance masjids are what? You come, they want somebody to lead prayers 5 times a day, maybe read a hadith after salah. Okay, that's fine. If that's what the community wants, they need to find somebody that's okay with that. But if you're looking for a masjid that's going to grow, it's going to evolve, it's going to connect with everything that's happening in a society with them, which in my personal opinion, the maintenance masjid is not actually going to give birth to, I don't think the maintenance masjid will be able to maintain anyone's faith beyond a certain generation. While on the other hand, you have the other extreme, which is like the really nice, all the young people in the masjid, and they just want to have amazing classes, but then guess what? It's only going to serve one demographic. They're not going to reach out and say have like a program for senior citizens or something like that. One thing actually we ended up doing with MCGP in Princeton was we did a senior citizens program, or at least it was supposed to be a senior citizens program, right? It was, we did a study of the Shikwa and Jawab al-Shikwa of Allama Iqbal. And it started off with like people who were, you know, South Asian in their 60s and 70s, but actually grew into a space where we had academics and young people coming together talking about the South Asian diaspora, the thought of like Allama Iqbal. Is that a selling point for a class? No, we had like 15 people a week. But we had 15 people or 10 people a week consistently for 1 year, and we had space for older people to talk about how they miss their homeland, how it's not normal to get up and leave your friends and family and the place you grew up in and you were born in, and just having those conversations, because not everyone can have those conversations. So I think it's just those segments, it's important to constantly go back and see what is it the community needs and work with them.
I can keep asking questions. I want to send it out to the...
No, I want to know what you think, right?
Well, one other thing that came to mind as you're talking is what's the responsibility of parents versus community? Many parents will say, no, well, I'll just do it myself. Other parents are just scared to even broach this topic. They might be scared to even bring their kids because the kids are going to come home and have 100 questions. If we did an open Q&A right now on does God exist with kids from 13 to 18, it'll probably generate 100 other questions. So how do we kind of balance this that, you know, kind of the, I think maybe it was the first point that if you want to reach out to the youth, which is always the target, right? But just as much so, the parents need to be reached out to as well, and
Yeah.
a crash course in Aqidah, a crash course in, okay, how do you prove God? So what do you think is the balance there with parents having to teach their kids and parents themselves having to up their knowledge, and where does the community fit into that kind of a triangle?
I think it's a good question, but there's an underlying assumption to really address, which is that why are we so afraid of asking questions about our faith? I think that's the first thing. As a parent, why am I so afraid? Right? What type of faith is that? If you question it, it falls apart. Is that really faith? Right? That may not be faith. That may be some idea of faith, but is it truly faith? Allah tells us what? وَعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ. That worship your Lord until you find certainty. Right? If we don't have certainty in our faith, is it truly faith? I think, in my opinion, it's always better to let the cat out of the hat than just let it, you know, sit there and throw it. Cat out of the hat or cat in the sack? What is it? Forgot.
I thought it was a bag.
It's out of the bag, right? I was thinking Dr. Seuss or something, right? But it's better to put things out and communicate as opposed to letting them muster and eventually metastasize into something greater. To give you an idea, right, you have young people that, on one end, yes, are questioning their faith and leaving Islam, but on the other hand, you do have a large critical mass which may not question their faith, may not go through something right away that will make them do that, but I've seen this often, right? Let's say a relative passes away, or somebody goes through a divorce, or somebody goes through like a very heavy trauma, and the way they were taught their faith is not actually providing them solace, but rather it's creating more confusion than providing certainty. You know, there's a famous hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he said that if you make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in times of ease, He'll be present in times of hardship. When it comes to understanding Islam and our faith, and for example, right, how do I know God exists? How do I know the Prophet ﷺ is truthful? How do I know the Qur'an wasn't doctored? How do I know that in this modern era, right, why is it wrong for same-sex couples to get married? Like, what's the big deal with that? Why is it wrong for me to speak out against human rights abuses? Why X, Y, and Z? Well, that's a good question. Why aren't we talking about those things? Right? If we can't talk about difficult topics, then what in the world are we doing in our masajid? Right? It reminds me of two lines of Allama Iqbal's poetry. He says, "Is raaz se na waqif hai, na mulla na faqih, kya samjhenge ye faqat do rakat ke imam." Right? He basically said that when it comes to understanding faith, what is your average like mullah? He's just saying that people who just don't do anything, they don't engage in an intellectual framework with people, right? And he says, what are these imams going to understand who just lead you in prayer? Meaning what? It's just blind faith, right? And blind faith is not something that we're called to. We're actually called to question. Imam Ghazali, Imam Juwayni, so many people said that I personally, if I have the ability to use my mind, I'm supposed to reason with myself and come to the conclusion as to why I believe God exists, why I believe the Prophet ﷺ is true, and why I believe that in this time and era that I live in, that it is an effort I have to engage in. And I personally don't think it takes that much effort if you know what you're doing.
So in terms of the effort, that's actually what I was thinking about next, the time.
Yeah.
One of the things I think is always critical is how much time you spend together. You know, if a husband and wife are each working 60 hours a week, I would dare say their marriage is probably in trouble, not spending time together. So in terms of being able to combat this society we live in terms of the messages we get, you know, we have solutions in a masjid like this where you have, mashallah, very good Sunday school, kids are coming and getting good knowledge, strong knowledge. The biggest fear I have is that it's not enough.
Yeah.
2 hours a week compared to 40 hours a week on TikTok, it's not gonna do the trick. So how do you strike a balance? How do you put in a potent 1 hour program a week in a masjid and expect it to combat what the kids are hearing? So what do you think about that? Because one of my uncles who passed away a long time ago, he said something really funny. He said that as you saw technology coming up, he said one of the things you see with technology, with phones and TV and internet, the idea is to give you information faster, to make things go faster. And yet, the more technology we have, the less time we have. Like the whole idea was to make it faster and easier so that you get the information. Boom. Look, we have 5G now, and we have 1 gigabit at home. All this more speed, but it hasn't actually done anything to free up our time. We're actually in a worse state, but we have less time to actually study the deen, to have conversations, to communicate with each other, to build actual physical bonds of friendship rather than just being keyboard warriors. So how do we manage that now where it seems like time is being squeezed, you know, as we know all the science, right? How do we manage that? That's my biggest concern is that is a 1 hour program a week enough at the masjid? Do we have to revolutionize our lives and say, well, you know what? We got to be Fajr Isha people, and then we can start talking. Fajr Isha in the masjid people, for example.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's going to be the formula. So what do you think? Is it more time in the masjid? Is it diversifying the programs online? What do we need to move forward to increase that engagement?
Yeah. I think it's multi-pronged, right? One of them, and I'll kind of go about it in a few ways. Number one is the family unit is very important as a community. The family unit, the nuclear family unit, is the first support for any child, any man, any woman. Right? If you are not working to make your nuclear family very strong, right? And I say nuclear family because often nuclear families may suffer because of the past traumas of maybe your extended family, right? Extended family issues, getting involved into the lives of children, getting involved into the lives and the marriage of the parents. The nuclear family is what needs to be catered to, number one. Number two, no, do not depend on the masjid. Do not depend on the community solely, right? I say this with a grain of salt. You as a parent are so involved, let's say, in your child's education, right? Everyone wants their kid to be really smart. They want their kid to be successful. They want their child to be able to grow in a way where the parent is always there, right? Parents maybe take their kids to PTA meetings. They'll take their kids to after-school tutoring and whatnot. So there is a time commitment that they'll make to make sure that's getting done. When it comes to our faith, are we connecting with our kids, let's say, about their faith, right? Is your child able to open up to you as a parent? And if not, why is that? Well, one thing that I've noticed in a lot of Muslim families is parents setting the barrier to entry to have a conversation so high where they do not allow any failure, any mistakes, any errors. So automatically, either that child is not ever going to open up to you, or if they start opening up to you and you start putting them down because of the questions that they ask, then automatically you are subjecting this child to such an extreme form of perfectionism in which they may gravitate away from the faith or from whatever because that's the association that they have to their faith, which is like excessive perfectionism, right? You didn't pray, how dare you, you're going to hell, etc., etc. You didn't do things that I wanted you to do in the way that I wanted you to do. So, okay, well, that child's going to grow up in a very difficult spot. And then lastly, like what you brought up, by the way, Nadeem's a TikTok star for anybody that doesn't know. So he has a very active TikTok channel, mashallah. I don't have TikTok, right? I think it's a tactic. But anyways, that was my dad joke of the day.
Don't hate it till you try it.
But this leads to another issue, which the little bit of Islam that somebody will take, like through like social media or through a YouTube clip, will be very reductionist, number one, and then number two, it will be very surface level, right? Like, why is it that the most popular clips about Islam on the internet are the ones that are the most controversial? Right? Why is that? Because that's what sells, right? Like the algorithms are made because they're like, oh, Muslims like to be outraged, or they're enjoying this watching people get outraged, right? The things you click, it records it, it makes an algorithm out of it. But coming back to the point, right, we're not talking about YouTube or whatnot. What we're talking about is that if you as parents, believe it or not, humble yourself and say, I don't know, let's figure it out together. Trust me, that will go a long way. I don't think people are actually looking for answers for many things. People are actually looking to ask the right questions. But for us, because we're always committed only to results, we skip the process of asking the questions, of formulating the questions to ask about things, right? But if you learn to ask the question and you're committed to that process, you have a better chance of finding the answer even if it's later, because you're doing it together as a family. Why do I say don't depend on the masjid? Because you as a parent are in the driver's seat. It is your job. It is your job as a parent to teach a child what they need to know, right? The masjid can assist in that. The school can assist in that, right? The hospital can assist in your child's health. But if you're not helping your child be healthy from beforehand, there's very little that a hospital can do. If you're not teaching your child what it means to be Muslim because you yourself don't know, then of course they're going to have a faith crisis at a certain time. If you are not on your child to do well in school because they're not motivated and whatnot, that comes back to you. The moral responsibility falls on the parents' backs. That's why, like the Qur'an for Professionals program, you guys can check it out. It's at Qur'anForProfessionals.com. I basically have a handful of young professionals that want to learn the Qur'an because they can't sit there in the masjid and go alif zabar a, ba zabar ba, right? With a bunch of little kids, it's embarrassing, right? So you have a peer group that's able to learn. My philosophy is that instead of teaching a child, I'm teaching a bunch of parents who are going to go teach their kids. Isn't that better? Parents are self-motivated. They're giving time, they're giving money, they're putting in effort, and adults understand that I need to do something to fix this situation. That's why my thing is that if you want to like look at your youth, just look at parents in the community. How much time are we giving to helping the nuclear family grow in that sense? Yeah. Yeah, but if anybody has any questions to add or comments that we want to expound upon, we can definitely do that. Maz? Yeah. Excellent.
In terms of the discussion on these skill sets of discussing with people from an emotional angle, intellectual angle, have you ever come across any type of curriculum for development, like holistically? Typically, Sunday school curriculums are like stories of the prophets, these halal, etc. But number one, any curriculum for development, and number two, resources to implement that. I've seen some communities, when you're talking about long term, they'll identify somebody with potential and pay for them to go through a full 3 to 5 year course to come back to the community and help, but more of like a local day-to-day family individual person.
Yeah, great question. So actually my lecture is based off of a course and a book. It's called Why Islam is True. That's actually the name of the book. And you can find it, it's not available yet, but the course is available at whyislamistrue.com. It was created by one of my teachers, Sheikh Hamza Karamali, who's based in Istanbul. So the course itself is a textbook that is written in very simple, clear English, teaching people how do you reason to the fact that God is true, how do you reason to the fact that Islam is fact, how do you reason to the truthfulness of the Prophet ﷺ. So I had actually just taught a portion of this course today at Darul Islah in Teaneck. So that's the curriculum as it's been developed, and it will be available for people. They actually don't just give the book out, they're doing teacher training. So they actually teach people who apply to the program. First you take the course, right? It's nothing crazy, it's like a $200 course. And then once you've taken it, you do teacher trainings, right? To actually teach this subject to young people in the community. So that's one curriculum that I know of that's really, really, really good. And it's very simple because after I took that course, it's actually what led me to move to Turkey because I've been doing a lot of studies in like ilm al-kalam and aqidah and whatnot. Like how have we as a Muslim community and within scholarship reasoned to the fact that God is true, right? That Islam is true. Because it's a very intellectual process. It's not something that you just do a hocus pocus out of the sky and that's it. No, there's a whole process to it. But unfortunately, community program has often been oriented towards the more flashy speaker who gives you really nice points, who's saying something that's a cliche that they say really nicely. Or even better, you have speakers, for example, that may have like nice recitations, and they'll give you very flimsy or nonsensical ideas, but then will recite a verse nicely or something like that, which leaves people in awe with the inability to actually comprehend what's been said. Which, again, Qur'an is good, don't get me wrong, reciting Qur'an is good. If you want to catch the audience, it's nice to hear a nice recitation. But what actually matters is a good teacher, and within chaplaincy training we learned this, right? A good preacher is not somebody who preaches. A good preacher or a good pastoral caregiver is somebody that can empower a lay individual to make a decision based on their own judgment. That's what, you want to know what good community is? It's the autonomy of the community member to discern whether what's being said is right or wrong. They're not just being appealed to emotionally, but they're able to be presented an argument that can be judged on its own merits. And I actually recommend this for you as a community. Like, if you have speakers that come in and just constantly emotionally appeal to your community, be a little weary of that, right? Be a little weary of that, and just make sure that if you're going to invest time into said individual, invest money into said individual, are they able to engage with people on that level? And I've seen this, right? Like, we'd go to certain programs back in the day, and somebody just pushed back against something that the speaker said. And everyone wants to like shield the speaker. Oh, no, how could you say that? That's the sheikh, that's the thing. Okay, well, if he's sitting in this chair, he's telling you something, he has a sense of accountability, or she has a sense of accountability to you. right? And never feel threatened by that, right? If that person runs off, even if it's me, like if I don't come back, it's fine, right? What matters is the health of the community. It's not the person that's sitting up here. Yeah. Alayhi salam.
Thank you for organizing this. This is a beautiful masjid. It's my first time here. I have a few comments. Thank you for this lecture. It's very, very deep, and it's touching on a very, very emotive topic. I've attended quite a few masjids in my life, in different, 4 different continents. And in some masjids, you ask certain questions, and you can get smacked down. I've actually been in situations where I've asked questions and I've been told that what I'm saying is an insult to the scholars. And I found that was in conflict with seeking knowledge. So that's my first comment. Some of the things that Ibn said there, if you usher them in certain environments, you're lucky to get out of there alive. The other thing I want to comment on is this focus on youth in certain massages. I belong to one of the masjids I belong to is Nigerian Masjid in New York. And one of the concerns there is that people my age, in late 50s, 60s, 70s, are retiring, passing away, moving back home. And the youth who are graduating from college and starting work, young professionals, are not attending the masjid. There's this fear that at some point the masjid will just disintegrate and disappear and there'll be no one at all. That's why there's such a high focus on youth programs to encourage them to come back into the community, to be active on the mission board, to get them involved in the affairs and management of the masjid in the hope that it won't disappear. And it's not because they're losing faith in the case of our masjid. It's just most of the youth feel they cannot handle the disposition of their parents, us, their parents, the way we do things, the cultural way we do things that we brought from back home. So that's why a lot of them have gone off on their own tangent. So that's why there's a lot of focus on youth, trying to encourage them to come back, because they have a lot to give. Most of them are very dynamic in their professional lives, and we need that. We need them to bring those skill sets back into the masjid.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to comment on, and it escapes me now, but when it comes back, I'll come back. Thank you.
Inshallah. So what I'll mention is, thanks, Sister Qudrat. So, by the way, Sister Qudrat's also part of the Qur'an for Professionals program, so she's here for my moral support. Alhamdulillah. When we talk about youth, I think the problem that occurs is, I think people are doing youth programs when we talk about it as like an afterthought, I like to think. So what is a youth program? We're going to have basketball and pizza at the masjid. Right, that's it. Like, that's what our youth program is. It'll be self-governed and they figure it out, which may be good to a certain degree. But a model that I have seen that works really well is the Muslim Youth of North America, MINA, for example. They had a youth director, and the youth director didn't just sit there and do like little khutbahs here and there. He actually had a master's in youth development, and with the master's in youth development that he had, he would consistently speak to the needs of the youth. He knew how to talk to them, right? If you understand, for example, within the study of psychology, you have something like Kohlberg's developmental model, right? Where do role models, for example, come into place in a young person's life? How is it that they're going to develop? Are we willing to invest, let's say, that money to train somebody to come back to the community, to work with the community, and actually build an initiative in which young people can be shepherded in the community, right? Are we willing to put that forth? No, we're going to spend $25 on 3 pies of pizza and $10 more on a flyer, and that's what our youth budget's going to be. Now, what does that lead to? That also becomes like, oh, young people in the masjid, all we have to do is talk about culture, right? Make a few funny references. And the truth of it is that if that's the standard that we're setting for young people to bring them to the masjid, I think we're taking young people as a joke. I think if we're not actually developing to understand the mind of a young person, investing in somebody that can shepherd them, that is specific to understanding the physical, psychological, physiological, spiritual needs of a young person that is literally in a jihad in public school, then we're not doing our job. I think that's the issue that it comes down to, right? So when you talk about youth, I think it becomes an afterthought. But true investing in the future of the youth is investing in somebody whose concern is to help them develop as young people, right? I think that's the most that we should be doing. I'm sorry, not the most. That's the least we should be doing in the community. But yeah.
All right, we got some questions online. So the first question is, can you remind everyone where to put questions?
Can I what?
Can I remind everyone where to put the questions? So if you want to do it online, it's tinyurl.com/falah, Qnafalh, Q&A. So we have a couple posted online. So we got the Google Forms over here. First question is, what's your response to those who argue that organized religion is the reason for societal corruption/oppression?
Is Iraq burning because of organized religion? Is Afghanistan burning because of organized religion? Right? Are countries starving because certain countries that don't have organized religion decided to bring democracy to them? Right? Is that what organized religion does? Oh, religion causes evil. I was like, well, if you look at the modern world right now, that's not what organized religion is doing. I mean, that's the thing. So is it evil? No. I think people that decide to do evil in the name of anything can do evil. If you want to take the Qur'an and take the verse of kill them wherever you find them, yeah, you can go do evil. If you want to go take the Bible and say that, you want to take the Old Testament, the New Testament and say that Jesus said that I have not come except to establish with the sword, you can use that as well. If you want to take the Second Amendment and say that I should be able to carry a gun into a school and shoot up kids, but it's okay if those kids die because of the fact that I should be able to carry my gun, right? The way you read the Second Amendment, then I guess the United States Constitution will also be along that. How do you read into the text? How do you use the context of where you live? Evil is not just intrinsic to religion or non-religion. Evil is intrinsic to people committing to do something and using literature, using politics, or using, for example, ideas of immigrants are taking our jobs to make that act of evil okay. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I think one of the points I usually use nowadays is the...
Sorry, and was it religion that when Leopold goes into Africa and kills 5 million people, right? Is that considered religion right there? Right?
What do you think about the example of using the abortion laws in this country and how they're flip-flopping?
To do what?
About the abortion laws in this country and how they're flip-flopping. And then those that are saying that it should not happen now are using religion as a tool. Because I don't think it's a normal Christian position, let's say, that if a woman's life is in danger, she's got to deal with it.
Well, I think, like I said, I think in a general answer, people will politicize religion for their own gains, right? Like as a Muslim, we know that in cases of or if a woman's life is in danger versus a child's life is in danger, we always say that the woman's life is given preference if that comes at the expense of the child passing away. So that's not the issue. I think specifically the overturning of Roe versus Wade is more of a politicized issue than a religious issue, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they argue that, then let's argue that's a religious matter.
Yeah.
No one's going to agree with that.
Yeah.
So, where do we draw the line between blind faith and rational thinking? I.e., where does rationality stop?
Rationality never stops when faith is not blind, right? Why do I say that? Because if you've reasoned to the fact that God is true, if you've reasoned to the fact that the creation has a creator, then is that the stop of rational thinking? No. Allah doesn't ever tell us to stop using our mind, right? What He tells us to do is consistently use our mind. But let's look at the Qur'an. The Qur'an says about a certain group of people, ختم الله على قلوبهم, right? That Allah has sealed their hearts. وعلى سمعهم, and their ears. وعلى أبصارهم, and their seeing or their sight. Okay, well, if God has sealed certain people's hearts, then what's the point of belief? Well, God sealed those individuals' hearts and their minds from believing because they don't want to believe. What they want to do is they want to exploit the weaknesses of people. They want to exploit the misgivings of people and use that for their own gain, right? Why is it that Abu Jahl did not go to paradise? Right? Because of the fact that one day him and Abu Sufyan were listening to the Prophet ﷺ recite the Qur'an, and they have a conversation and they say, well, do you think this is the truth? And one of them responds, of course it is. This is the truth. The Qur'an is the truth, but it's bad for the business. It's bad for money. It's bad for the economy. That's literally what the response was. So for those types of people, yeah, they're sealed off. They're not going to believe. And then for trust, for example, if I've concluded that Allah is true and Islam is true and all that stuff, and Allah asks me to do something, I've already believed, right? And I have intuition that whatever this person tells me to do is good. If I have a good relationship with another human being, and they say, hey, get in the car, let's go for a ride, right? Do you sit there and ask, where are we going? How are we going? If the person says, nah, just wait, I'm not going to tell you. Are you getting in that car based on blind faith or on trusted intuition? You're getting in that car because you trust that person, right? You're getting in the car because you believe in that person. So automatically, if Allah is telling us to do something, see, I think a question like that comes with a certain assumption, which is that, well, faith has to be blind, right? I have to blindly jump into this, but no, faith is not blind. Sure, there's things that we may not see. For example, we believe in Allah, right? But we don't see Allah. We believe in the prophets. Have we literally seen the prophets? No. But if we follow this sense of thinking and learn how to think and learn how to conclude that Islam is true, and I really recommend that you all take the course. It's a 16-week long course, like an hour a week. It's nothing crazy. Then you'll actually figure out that, yeah, this actually makes sense. And faith is neither telling us to stop using our minds and not being rational, and faith is neither blind.
What do we say to someone who has used rationality and logic to argue that God does not exist? There are many counter-arguments to things like the Kalam argument that you alluded to. So I think that they're trying to answer that question by saying, let's use Kalam to
Yeah.
counter. But yeah, what do you say about someone who has used rationality and logic to argue that God does not exist?
Sure. So what do you do when somebody says that God is not true and I've logically concluded that? Well, examine those premises, right? Go down it one by one by one. So for example, somebody will say, bad things happen in this world, therefore God doesn't exist, right? Well, number one, how do you perceive good and bad? Because in the Qur'an, for us, عَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا فَهُوَ شَرٌّ لَكُمْ. Perhaps there's something that you may deem to be good, but it's actually bad for you. And perhaps there's something that you deem to be bad, but it's actually good for you, right? We know this within the Quranic stories of like Khidr, right? Telling Musa alayhi salam about him doing things that were seemingly bad, but they were actually for the better, greater good of society. So now if I'm reasoning to that, well, what are the reasons that I provide, right? I don't think I can answer the question just based on that premise, right? It's what's the reasoning behind it? And then you go from there. I've reasoned to it. Okay, well, how have you reasoned to it? I think the question's too broad right now.
Yeah, the questions are coming in, so just try to be specific with the question.
Yeah.
Getting like 4-word questions. Like there's a question here, Islam and LGBT issues. Where do you want to go?
Yeah. But just try to keep it in the subject matter. That's what I just recommend, right? Like, don't ask me if you can eat McDonald's.
Right? I already asked him.
He already asked me, right? Don't eat McDonald's. It's not. It's bad for you.
It's not organic. You mentioned that we assume creation has a creator. Using the examples that this question used to not exist and now it does. People listen to you. How do we know the universe/world was created? How do we know that it wasn't always there, since we weren't there to witness a time before it existed?
Wonderful question.
Good question.
In 1929, a discovery was made through somebody with the last name of Hubble, right? You ever heard of the Hubble telescope, right? Said individual observed the galaxies in this universe and said that, or rather he observed that the galaxies were moving farther and farther apart, right? So the galaxies were moving farther and farther apart, in which he made an observation that the universe was expanding. If something that is inanimate is moving farther and farther apart, the observation was that now there's more space for it to move into. Now, this theory is actually the underlying base idea for the Big Bang Theory. We all know about the Big Bang Theory, correct? Up until 100 years ago, until 1929, which was, 93 years ago, the underlying assumption was that the universe has always existed, actually. And Islamic theologians, 1,000 years ago, constantly were responding to this idea of philosophers saying that the universe has always existed. The problem with that idea for Muslims is that we only have one entity in the entirety of the cosmos that has always existed, which is Allah, God. God has always existed. What we call, what we refer to Allah as within Ilm al-Kalam is wajibul wujud. He is a necessary existent. Necessary not because, oh my God, it's so terrible if God didn't exist. If you reason with the idea, if I tell you right now, right, on a very specific note, this bottle has water, right? This bottle has water. Is it possible that there was a time that this bottle didn't have water? Is it possible? Could I conclude that? Why? Because I see that there's something there. It doesn't have to be that way. So similarly with the universe has a creator, right? If I said this table is here right now, right? Is it possible that this table was not here? Is it possible? In this space, occupying it? No, I think the table's just been here. Right? I didn't see it. I didn't see somebody put it there. It had to have been there. Does that logically make sense? So if on such a small matter it doesn't make sense, and I assume that, is the table something created? Right? Or is the table divine? No, it's something created. And if something is created, it has to have what? A creator. So the universe has to have a creator. Coming back to the point, though, of the Big Bang Theory. The Big Bang Theory said that over time, the universe has expanded, which means what? There was a time period that it was very, very, very small or inexistent, right? That's what it comes down to. Like modern science accepts the fact. Like the ideas of modern science, which at times are in contradiction with what Islam may say, or the assumptions at least that will say, says that the universe has a beginning. And something that has a beginning was created, and something that's created has a creator. That's how we reason to it. And even the Qur'an, actually, the Qur'an says what? وَالسَّمَاءَ بَنَيْنَاهَا بِأَيْدٍ وَإِنَّا لَمُوسِعُونَ. And the skies we've created it with our hands, and indeed we are ever expanding it. So the idea of the universe being created and constantly expanding is actually from the Islamic tradition. Salam.
Two questions. For the people who leave the faith of Islam, especially at young age, sometimes they don't have that intellectual reasons, and they don't want even to get in that argument. I feel like from talking with you, they just are not able to, restrain from the temptations, and they're clear about it in that sometimes, that, I don't want to get in that, God exists or not, and they just want to do whatever they want to do. So what is the good argument against that? It's kind of emotional, but where do you categorize that and how to tackle that?
Yeah.
The second question, it might be not related to the topic, but the example you give about the masajid, they're copying from each other instead of sometimes avoid the mistakes that other masajid fell in. So how to avoid the mistakes that other masajid did before us? Jazakallah khair.
Okay. So, number one, if somebody's emotionally leaving the faith or making a decision to go away from the faith, there's not much argument, I'd say, that you want to do, but more so understand where this person is coming from. What is the gap or the area in their heart and mind that is not being satiated by Islam, that they think they'll find that satiation, that fulfillment elsewhere, right? Often you do have that, and actually that's a much easier space to work in. And I think that has to do with, look, you live in a place where Islam is not the common faith. Your son or daughter is constantly fighting against every single thing in their life because of the fact that Islam may not be in tune with those ideas, right? The idea of maybe having a boyfriend or a girlfriend, the idea of drinking, the idea of smoking weed and doing drugs, all these are drinking alcohol. Like they're constantly in a space where if the balancing effect, if they have friends and they have peers and they have influences, whether that's the internet or whatnot, that is basically emotionally pulling them into a certain direction, then you have to address that and speak to them, to their emotions, as to why or how they can be more fulfilled in their faith. Why do you need a youth director or a youth coordinator? I'll tell you why. Because you don't live in a space. While somebody's like, oh, in India or in Pakistan or in Egypt, there was no youth director. Yeah, why? Because you don't live in a place that's constantly pulling you away as a young person from it. Like having a young person that understands the mind of a young person, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, who studied it, is what's going to help, right? That's the first thing. And secondly, what's the home environment we create for a young person wherein they feel emotionally attached to their faith, where it can be used as an antidote against the society that they're living in? That's the first answer. And then the second question, other masjid's mistakes. I think we all know, right? Like as a community, like we always talk about what we can do to make a better space. Right? What's the actual reason people make new spaces? Is because they feel other spaces are not represented or not representative of the ideas that they want to foster in the community, right? So I think it's having a planned community, having planned ideas, right? Having planned programming. I think all of that comes down to coming together and constantly being in conversation with the community. And each community is different.
For sure, the sister side.
Like Sam.
So my question is a little bit going after the brother that was also talking regarding Muslims that leave the faith. And I don't know if you've heard of the ex-Muslims of North America. The last 10 years is a nonprofit that are ex-Muslims that have left the religion, and they are 25 chapters throughout North America, and they're little by little going into the colleges and trying to get and convince the student bodies, to leave Islam. My question to you directly is, how do you approach, or how do you stop with that conversation? Because their method is very tactical when it comes to atheism and how to just make them completely believe in nothing. How do you approach your peers, students, or people in universities and college regarding that? Especially they just left because they've been throughout a mission that they did have a youth director. They did go through every week in school. They went through everything and learning from their own. How do you approach people like that? Especially like they were brought up in the.
So are you talking about speaking to ex-Muslims?
Yes, and people who are weak in their iman that they're ready to leave because they've been convinced by that nonprofit.
Sure. Good question. So some years ago, there was a young man that I knew relatively well. He himself was a hafiz of the Qur'an. He had spent some time studying Islam, roughly 2 years, learning Arabic, learning the Islamic sciences. We went on to lead tarāwīḥ together. And a couple years later, I found out that he basically has decided that he's struggling with faith. And not only is he struggling, he made a commitment that I'm done with Islam. What was the reasoning of this young man who memorized the Qur'an and had done all these different ventures to understand his faith? Is he had a very transactional idea of God and of Islam, which often in the community, we always are teaching transactional piety, right? If you do this, you get that. If you don't do this, you won't get that. Now, does the Qur'an speak about transactions in that sense? Yeah, for example, Allah says, Inna Allah ishtara min al-mu'minin. Allah has purchased the lives of the believers through their faith, right? But it's a way to encourage people in different ways. Allah does not always talk in a transactional manner, but it's one of the ways He does it so that He can reach a wide amount of people to understand this message. This young man prayed and prayed and prayed to Allah in his words to get into a top Ivy League university, right? And unfortunately, he only got into Stanford, right? That's, Wallahi al-Azim, is the reason he decided to leave Islam, right? And now, as a ex-Muslim who's constantly speaking about Islam, who speaks Arabic, he's like, well, I found a problem with this, with this, with this, with this, with this. And I had a conversation with him. I said, his family wanted me to speak to him. And he said, look, I'm a nihilist. A nihilist is somebody that finds meaning in nothing. There is no meaning for my life. There is no meaning of me being here. There is no meaning of living on this earth. So I told him similarly, look, let's talk via premise and conclusion. What is it that you believe about the world? He goes, no, I'm not going to talk to you in an organized manner because this world is madness, right? So if I can't begin to speak to you about that, and you're not looking to have a common ground with me, then there isn't much I can do to have a conversation. You've made up your mind. And sure, there may be ex-Muslims out there that are arguing from the perspective of rationale. They're arguing from the perspective of emotion. And you know what? There may be people that may be ensnared by that, right? But my question is, when it comes down to understanding this, right? I think a lot of folks who do end up leaving Islam may do it from an intellectual point of view, but if you were to ask me or to ask somebody else, right, how do you understand that intellect? To give you an example, right, somebody brought up like LGBTQ. For me, as a Muslim, I don't believe that it is morally correct for there to be two Muslims marrying into a same-sex marriage, right? We don't believe that as Muslims. Now, you live in a state where LGBTQ history is now mandated to be taught in public schools. I think many of you may know this, right? So already you're living in a space where what's considered illogical for us as people of faith is being taught as logical, right? So what somebody may deem to be logical may in fact not be logical. And sometimes logic will not help you get to where you need to get to. Sometimes brute facts do. Is it through logic that you have the United States involved in turning over governments? No, you don't have that, right? There are things that people will do just won't fit logic. And the Qur'an speaks about that too, right? The Qur'an talks about pushing back with force against those that oppress. Are you going to sit there and just do logic with that person? No, everything has its time and place. Similarly, there may be somebody that's challenged by their faith because of that, right? Often, listen to ex-Muslims, fine. You know, they have what they say. They can say what they want. But it's not just ex-Muslims. It can be Islamophobes, right? If we're going to take every critic's argument seriously, some people's arguments should be taken seriously, right? That's fine. Have those conversations. But inshallah, if we build a community that is fostered in the ability to intellectually connect with people, to even emotionally connect with people in a healthy manner, I'm sure we'll be creating a generation of Muslims that will be able to weather those storms, inshallah.
There's 3 questions left online, and I want to make sure. There's 3 questions left online. I want to make sure we get to them in the 12 minutes we have left, inshallah. All caps, so I'm not going to miss a good word. Some go to become Muslim scholars. Some go to become Muslim scholars. Some people do nothing. What's the balance for Islamic self-development and knowledge? How much is known?
Some people go to become scholars. Some people do nothing.
So what's the balance?
What's the balance? The balance is knowing the bare minimum, right? A man came to, Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi, right? A famous scholar of tafsir and of kalam and of philosophy, came into a city, and people were like clamoring around him, right? Kind of a little bit of a celebrity. And an old woman asked, who is this man, right? And they said, this is Fakhruddin al-Razi. He wrote a book about the 1,000 proofs of God. She goes, oh, so he must have had 1,000 doubts for him to have written a book about 1,000 proofs. Meaning what? Not everyone has to always reason. Some people are not going to have a crisis of faith. And that's completely cool. That's great, right? Some of you are a lot older than me. Did you sit there knowing everything about Islam? No. Did you have a crisis of faith? No, right? Because maybe you grew up in a Muslim environment where it's just like, okay, well, I don't have that as an issue. But again, if you're living in a place in which it is not common for religion to be cool, right? It's not common for Islam to be considered truth. Or maybe just like it's a truth, right? I think all religions are good. Or all ideas about God are good. Well, that doesn't work either, right? For us, truth is objective. For me as a Muslim, what good is Islam if everyone's truth is the same, right? So it comes down to that. What is it that you need as an individual, and how do you get to it? I can't say what's the bare minimum. The bare minimum, I think, in this time and age, if you have young people, is teaching them to love Allah, to love the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but also not just love, make sense of that love, right? Like, think about this. You know, sometimes like people are looking to get married, and like a young person is like highly infatuated with somebody that's probably terribly incompatible with them, but they see nothing in front of them except this person, right? That's where blind love will do what? If you shut off your brain and you marry somebody that's completely incompatible for you, then is that something healthy to do? No. It's what the hadith of the Messenger said, right? We live between hope and fear. Well, same thing. We live into a middle path where we recognize the needs and we cater to those needs.
Okay, two more. Please give one of best logical reason argument for each. So you got three. One logical argument for each. Why God exists? Why the Prophet is true? Why the Qur'an is true? Before we end the event.
Okay, so why is God true? So I already explained that one, right? That it's a logical premise that if there's a creation, there is a creator. Is the universe creation? It is. Okay. So does it need a creator? Okay, done. Next one. Why the Prophet is true. So that comes back to something else, right? So there's a lot more premises that you use to argue. Okay, so we have God, right? We've proven that there's a creator. Did I say that that creator is Allah? No. But then we start having a conversation. Okay, well, if there's a creator, what are the attributes of that creator? Well, we say that the creator has to be a being of life, right? The creator has to have volitional agency, which is, does the creator choose to do what they want to do, or are they compelled? So for example, anything that has will, right, and has ability has to have life. You see this water bottle. What just slapped the water bottle? My hand, right? My hand is picking up this water bottle. Does my hand itself make a choice to slap that bottle? Was it my hand that made that choice? Where did that choice come from? Me, right? I had the agency and I had the ability to do what I just did. So, is it possible for me to not slap that bottle? It is. So I don't have to do it then, right? Do I? I don't have to do it. I'm not compelled. So automatically what? The universe, did it create itself? It doesn't have life. No. So if I'm saying that my hand is creation, and something as large as the universe is creation, I know that the will originated in me, a being with life. Does it not also logically make sense that the creation of the universe also originated with a being of life? Right? Now, that goes down and down and down. So you figure out this God. It has these traits. The God must do this. God exists. Okay? What does God do? What can God do? We discuss all of that. Okay. And then what else do we say? We say, well, how did we know who this God is? We say, who claims to know God? Okay, the Messenger ﷺ made a claim saying that Islam is true. Well, can't anyone say anything? Sure, but the Messenger ﷺ provided us with a logical argument to think about God. Right? Think about this, right? All these different ayat in the Qur'an. قُلْ أَرَأَيْتُمْ. Right? What do you think? What do you ponder? إِنْ جَعَلَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكُمُ اللَّيْلَ سَرْمَدًا. That if God were to just have eternal nightfall on the earth, what would happen? The earth would burn up. If God were to intend for there to be eternal sunshine, Or sorry, if there was nightfall, the earth would freeze. If there was eternal sunshine, the earth would do what? It would burn over. So there's changes happening. Do changes have to happen? Does the earth make the decision to change its weather or to turn? No. All of that goes back to that. If the Prophet ﷺ is telling us that, then we say, okay, the logical argument makes sense. Now, this man is coming as a prophet. Then what makes him distinct? The one thing we say is that makes a prophet distinct is the ability to have miracles. Miracles which transcend the idea of what, let's say, a modern scientific argument would say. Now, for example, you have two cars that collide at a certain rate of speed, at a certain time period, in a certain place. All the conditions are assessed. The G-force is understood. Everything that broke is seen. But let's say one person passes away and the other person doesn't. And you bring him to the hospital. And the doctors say that, I don't know how this person survived. Well, you're a scientist. Shouldn't science be able to explain the how of everything? Well, it's an act of God. Even we say it to that extent. So when we look at the life of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we see some of these miracles. What was one of those miracles? The Qur'an. The greatest miracle, there's a lot of miracles the Prophet ﷺ professed and did, but the greatest miracle is the Qur'an. How do you understand the Qur'an? How do you begin to imagine the Qur'an? You've got to understand it. Right? The Qur'an is not necessarily a science or history textbook, but when the Qur'an foretells events, غُلِبَتِ الرُّوم, that the Romans are going to be defeated, and they are defeated. When the Qur'an is able to speak about the molecular structure of an embryo, and the man telling it to you is a prophet in the desert of Arabia. When Orientalists, right, at Princeton you have people like Michael Cook and formerly Patricia Croney, right, going over and saying that, that yes, fine, we can exist, we can prove the existence of the Qur'an we can prove that the Qur'an goes back to the Prophet ﷺ. We can prove the Prophet ﷺ existed. If non-Muslims come to that conclusion, why is it that we feel otherwise? Right? That's how it comes down to.
Last one, I think this is pretty good to wrap it up, inshallah. What do you say to a parent or parents that have children who refuse to follow Islam and are completely disrespectful? Is it okay for that parent or siblings to break connections and break ties of kinship?
Two things to keep in mind. Number one, if you're going to talk to your child and your relationship with them has generally been terrible, right? Right? It hasn't been good, then it's going to take more than just making them believe Islam is true to help repair that relationship. It may require you as a parent to see where you are off emotionally in understanding that child. Number two, breaking off relationships? No. What does that do? We don't break relationships, right? Unless that person is harmful, unless that person is just a terrible human being and they attack you. But we see companions that had non-Muslim like relatives, right? We see companions that, sure, those that waged war on Allah and the Rasul is a different story, but always leave that door open, because I think with parents, often it may often be an emotional thing more so than a rational thing. But I think for the night, that discussion will suffice. Jazakumullahu khairan. Oh, so yeah, inshallah, jazakallah khair for having this program. I welcome you all to really check out the course, Why Islam is True. It's taught by Sheikh Hamza Karamali of Basira Education. And continue having conversations, have open conversations. Take notes with your kids, talk to them. Right? As an adult, if you have a doubt, talk about the doubt. Don't just leave it. Ibrahim alayhi salam had doubts and he spoke about them. Right? To question those doubts is a Quranic principle, and don't ever feel otherwise. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين واستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم.
Jazakallah khair, Imam Nihal, for coming and joining us today. This is the beginning of, inshallah, continuing events and programs we're going to have at the Al-Furqān Center. I want to share one hadith is because the Prophet ﷺ is reported that he said, "Ash-shifā'u as-su'āl." Right? The cure for ignorance is to ask questions. So that's the basis of